So even as Jurassic Park gets set to go tonight with the Raptors playing for their season lives, we're also focusing on a real dark side to the whole issue of basketball notably, and that's the issue of sports betting. It too is heating up as the Raptors inch ever closer to playoff basketball. Sports betting puts more focus on individual players, and some are saying they're facing real hate and vitriol online, some of which is linked to sports betting and gambling. Meg Roberts has that story today.
April, a win for Toronto sports fans with the Leafs, Raptors and Blue Jays all playing at the same time. But with more sports comes more sports betting, which some athletes say they could do without. Toronto Raptor Chris Boucher making this comment on Yahoo Sports Canada.
Man, I'm so over this, man. People are literally, I got called. Somebody said I chose the wrong slave today. Literally, send me that message. I had to read it. I couldn't believe it.
Well,
yeah, he said I chose the wrong slave because I had only 5 points and he needed me to score 10.
Bruce Kidd is a former Olympian and professor of sport and public policy. What do you make of a story like that?
Well, it's very upsetting that athletes are under this pressure and they're getting these attacks for not meeting the point spread or the parlay that a bettor has placed. I'm at a loss for words about how upsetting that is.
Kidd says sports betting is becoming dangerous for the authenticity found in sport.
It poisons sport, it distorts sport.
Kidd says gambling is amplified by accessibility. A quick Google search and dozens of betting apps come up. The harassment of players, he says, heightened by social media. Both those things you can now do from the comfort of your couch. Toronto Raptor Fred Van Fleet says his own experiences have driven him away from online engagement.
the same people that is talking about us, like, you can't fathom dealing with this on a daily basis. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't fathom I hope your mom dies DM every day.
Every day.
The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario says it's appalled by such acts. It said incidents of this nature fall outside the AGCO's realm of regulatory authority and that it enforces strict standards when it comes to advertising and imposes outright prohibitions to advertising to children. Kidd says the Canadian government needs to come up with tougher laws.
Surely we can eliminate the messages upon children and youth that sport is mostly about betting. That's crazy.
Kidd says he's planning on putting together a campaign to ban advertising of all forms of gambling. Meg Roberts, CBC News, Toronto.
So you saw Meg's report raising some key issues there. Let's talk about them in more detail with someone you know from his frequent appearances on this program. Akil Augustine back with us, the host and producer at NBA TV Canada. He's in Toronto this morning. It's always good to see you. Welcome back, Akil.
Thank you for having me.
Especially when I have big questions to ask. You were watching Meg's report as we were getting set, and you saw in it how upsetting the whole thing was to Bruce Kidd, whom she interviewed. What about you? What's your reaction to that report, Akil?
It's just another example of the state of the culture we're currently in, especially in the age of social media and anonymity and ability for people to communicate things that I don't think they would communicate if it was their name and their likeness attached to this message that they're sending out. Just another thing that professional athletes have to deal with, knowing the prominent position that they hold in our society and culture.
But is it something that you could have foreseen they would have to deal with when they brought in this type of, sports betting? Is it an unintended consequence? Is it an impact that was underestimated, or is the whole thing a surprise that it should go in that direction?
I don't think it can be a surprise. All swords are double-edged, right? So I think with the increased opportunity economically, you kind of knew that there would be a social impact to any kind of gambling introduced into society. That's often the conversation that's had before, a casino opens in a neighborhood or a new type of gambling technology is introduced. So it's to be understood that this was going to be a conversation coming out of it. I think it's tough on the players, and it's unfortunate they have to deal with it. But there have been other things that have instigated comments like that. And again, I always go back to social media and the ability to easily communicate with players. And even that was a double-edged sword. So this is something that we're going to have to deal with, because obviously I don't see us moving back away from gambling as being part of the sport landscape.
No, and I want to talk about, I do want to ask you specifically about that, but you mentioned, how the players have to deal with this. And we heard, it was Chris Boucher and Fred VanVleet talking about that publicly in a couple of different Raptors-related podcasts. But Fred's comments there about how you cannot fathom how difficult it is to deal with on a daily basis, some of the comments that he's received. What are you hearing from the players in terms of what effect all of this is having on them?
Well, it's harder and harder to kind of live in that bubble, that shell that the players rely on. LeBron James often talked about going dark mode during the playoffs so he can prepare himself, not have too many media messages in his ear when he's trying to gear up for the playoffs. And I think a lot of players are choosing to do that with social media, and it's a big part of their revenue stream. So it's tough. It's a battle that they're going to have to continue. Kudos on these guys, though, for coming out and stepping up and talking about the impact it has on them and their mental health. And hopefully this inspires the fan base to be a little more conscious and cognizant of the things that they're doing, and also put the pressure on us to, when we recognize people in our community who are having, the kind of reactions to a player not meeting their parlay bets, not to, allow those messages to become the dominant message, or to communicate those to people who don't need to hear about your decisions that you made when you're gambling.
As you suggest, it seems unlikely that this kind of sports betting will be going away. Ontario reported $1.4 billion in total gaming revenue in just this first year of being in existence in Ontario. So it's likely here to stay. Who and how, then, Akil, should be addressing this issue that's been a consequence of it?
That's a tough one, because like it was mentioned in the feature, and it falls out of the jurisdiction of a lot of the people that you would usually rely on. This is not a police issue. This is not something that the Lottery and Gaming Commission can come in and monitor and moderate. It falls on us as individuals and the type of society we're creating. And do we, have these conversations? Good on you for bringing this subject up and for making people aware. At the end of the day, it falls on us and on the fans, and what kind of community and culture that we want to create. And do we want to be a fan base that allows players to come here and feel comfortable? Because, we want to attract free agents. We want young people to come here and feel like they're part of the community. So I think for the fans, the pressure falls on us. Like, what kind of atmosphere and environment do we want to create for our athletes? And do we want them to feel safe and comfortable and be able to compete on a night-to-night basis at the highest level?